Hello, and make Objectivism great again. This video is going to address some of the issues I've talked about in the last year or so, ever since I made the Make Objectivism Great Again videos in honor of Lindsay Perigo's open letter. So, I think many objectivists need to read the Ayn Rand Journals to really understand her thinking, where she's coming from. So, in one of the last Bruno and Lindsay transmissions, I read a passage from the journals where she talked about basically, well, I can't remember exactly. What was it? It was something about... it was about the Ubermensch. That was the video. The Ubermensch video. She didn't use the word Ubermensch, but she talked about the higher type of man. So, regarding the higher type of man, which is obviously a very anti-egalitarian and anti-equalist viewpoint, just to remind everyone what that means, equalist is the view that all men are created equal, which Yavrong Brook has defended on his latest Jesse Lee Peterson encounter, which I urge everyone to watch. And he said, I believe all men are created equal. Well, he doesn't have this accent. He has that, weird accent, but that's what he said. I believe all men are created equal, which of course is completely wrong. Not all men are created equal. And I'm sure if, my audience is honest enough, some of y'all are smarter than the norm, so you probably realized you weren't born equal, so to speak, at a very young age, when you were probably in elementary or middle school. You realized you were smarter than other people. And my argument is that, not my argument, I mean, this is just basic common sense, and it's the facts show this, that we're born differently. We have different abilities. I mean, this should be obvious. I think one of the examples I like to use is the child prodigies. So child prodigies they obviously did not think themselves into prodigy. If you're at 6 years old writing a perfect symphony, it means there's something there. There's something more in that 6-year-old than other people. And some people have a very good sense of orientation. Some people are terrible at it. Some people are better at math and so forth. So we are not born equal. That's just flat out wrong. And Ayn Rand, in her journals, in the Fountainhead section, so I know a lot of objectivists, their favorite book is The Fountainhead. Comes even before then Atlas Shrugged. In The Fountainhead, Howard Roark is born that way, quote unquote. So Howard Roark is born without the capacity to consider others and so forth. He is born that way, and that's what makes him so relatable. Even though he's unrelatable in a certain sense, he's still relatable because the people around him realize that he's different. So there's his friends that are more quote unquote normal, let's say, and they love him for his his difference, his weirdness. I mean, he's great, but he's weird as well. Weird just means different, right? It means outside of the norm. And Howard Roark is obviously outside of the norm, and that's how Ayn Rand conceived of him. He conceived of him as being born this way, so to speak, to use that saying, But So what happens later on, the journals are interesting because you see her development, right? So I wanted to talk about this, this Pat. She talks about this Pat person very often. It's, she's having her thoughts, and then she says, oh, but Pat said da-da-da-da-da. Maybe Pat is right. And it seems that in almost all cases, she gives credence to Pat. Pat convinces her somehow. Pat convinces Ayn of her position. So I learned that this is actually Isabel Patterson. I don't know who she is. I mean, I have really no idea. But I want to read a relevant passage. Oh, but sorry, I forgot. So to reiterate what I already wrote in my blog post, you can find on my website. It's called Obleftivism's Egalitarianism, or you can find it as the Leftist Perversion of Objectivism. That's what I'm usually linking to, which is only the better written and more abstract piece, the more intellectual piece, the meat of the matter. So, and I use the word equalist and egalitarian. So equalist means the view that all men are created equal. So it's an ontological position, a metaphysical position, so to speak. While the egalitarianism is the political corollary. So, since all men are created equal, the obleftivists, they don't think there's any. They think it's immoral, it's wrong to, screen for immigrants at the border that have a compatible culture or whatever. They think that's immoral, that's evil, that's racist, blah blah blah, all that, all that crap. So, equalism and egalitarianism. So, Ayn Rand starts out very unegalitarian and unequalist. She starts out very much in the strain of the right-wing thinkers of her time, the American right-wingers, like so the idea is that there's in fact, so to speak, a hierarchy of human beings, so to speak. So this Ubermensch thing I put in the video was, of course, it was quote-unquote clickbait, but not really. I mean, you can call it Ubermensch, you can call it whatever you want. The point is, Howard Rourke is born that way. And Ayn Rand thinks he's the ideal. So Ayn Rand thinks that the ideal is, in fact, unreachable for most people. In Objectivism proper, she'll say that she believes everyone can be perfectly moral, but that doesn't mean she's going to fall in love with the perfectly moral plumber. That's not Ayn Rand. She wants someone of her same caliber, or a higher caliber than her. She wants someone better. She wants the ideal man. That's why she goes to fiction. She has to write fiction to find this ideal man, because it doesn't exist. Her perfect ideal doesn't exist. She needs to create it in fiction. And she won't be satisfied with anything less than that. She probably fell in love with her husband based on his sense of life. She liked that, using that word, his sense of life, the exalted sense of life, the opposite of the tragic sense of life, in effect. So that's probably what attracted her to her husband, and of course she considered him extremely handsome and so forth. So that has a role, an important role, that equalists and egalitarians will try to, push under the rug, the aesthetic, which is very important. while the other guy, the Brandon, she probably fell in love with Brandon because of his intellect. So she thought Brandon was a genius. So in effect, that was closer to the ideal in the intellectual sense. So again, he was born that way, right? So Brandon was born smarter than Frank, her husband, or whatever. He was smarter, more intellectual. So she valued that. So she's valuing metaphysical givens, so to speak. She's valuing ontological facts, not the choices per se. Or it's a mix of the two. But again, would she be in love with the perfect moral plumber? I don't think so. Now, let me read you a passage which I think is illuminating in showing this shift from the unequalist, unegalitarian position she had at the beginning, and her sort of softening of her position more towards egalitarianism and equalism by the end of Atlas Shrugged. And that's why I believe many critics think that Atlas Shrugged is less relatable. Specifically, the characters are less relatable because they're all perfect, so to speak. So I think that's a good... I think the root of that critique is her shift in this position. So she's shifting her position to her heroes have thought themselves into perfection, so to speak. So that's the problem. So let's go. Let me read you a piece from this. It's from The Transition Between the Novels, The Moral Basis of Individualism. That's how it's categorized. So it's September 30th, 1944. So this is in the transition between The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, which, as I mentioned, is the turning point. So, let's see, I'll read the whole thing, maybe 5 minutes or so, maybe less. So, the relation of the immediate and the long-range immorality, the impression that evil pays. After we have defined the good and the evil, what are the proper methods of fighting the evil? A Peter Keating type might make the argument, since I have a second-hander's social talent, why should I not exercise it to the limit and get more than I could by my own ability? Here comes the question of the proper relation between the primary and the secondary matters, between basic individualism and functioning in a society of exchange. All right, let's skip this because it's not. All right, I'll read the whole thing. She puts in parentheses. Note on a good argument about the position of an unemployed man in a capitalist society. The primitive condition of fighting nature directly is always open to him. Pat's argument. So she's mentioning Pat here. But the advantages left to him by others, by civilization, more than balance the hazard of having to seek employment through other men. Through other men. He is asking for a chance created for him by others. So this is basically, the idea that I don't want to be working for others. That's a mentality related to individualism, but she thinks it's not the proper individualism and so forth. So I'll skip this piece. It's just not directly relevant. It was just relevant to read that part that she's mentioning Pat again. Now, here she talks about something interesting, especially interesting in the debate around the private monopolies such as Google and Facebook and so forth. So I'll read this piece. So Think very thoroughly on the relation of theory to practice, covering every possible instance where it looks as if theory does not have any meaning in practice. So, analyze cases such as a cameraman blacklisted by Hollywood, the closed shop disaster to the New York stage. In other words, you're not forced to deal with established producers, with the monopolies, the private monopolies, but in practice it means that you cannot have a producer. So if all the producers don't want you, what you gonna do? So she's thinking about this problem. Now she says, okay, so it's obvious that these producers have this monopoly power at a certain point. They have a monopoly power, even in a free market economy. So she says, does this mean that individualism then degenerates into its opposite in practice, into collectivism? Has the size of an enterprise, made possible by the scope covered by modern inventions, anything to do with it? So you see how prescient this is. In other words, does an invention such as the telephone give the individual who controls it a collectivist's power by the sheer size of his business? And she says, no, I think. Okay. Granted that such monopolies would be destroyed by counter-inventions if man's ingenuity is left free, what happens to individual victims in the meantime? So this is a reminder, while I'm reading is, what I'm thinking is, this is a reminder to quote-unquote objectivists that they need to stop being such insufferable a-holes. So if Ayn Rand can ask these questions about monopoly, why can't, these objectivists accept discussion over whether Facebook and Google and so forth, they should be, whether they in fact are a problem because of its monopoly power? These quote-unquote objectivists will just jump at you and call you evil and collectivist because, somebody might have mentioned that maybe the antitrust would be good in this case. Now, Ayn Rand is asking these questions to herself. So, would these quote-unquote objectivists attack Ayn Rand in 1944 as viciously as they attack other people on Facebook? That's a question, right? So, the point I'm starting to read back from the journals. The point here seems to be size. Before modern inventions, enterprises were within the personal scope of one man's control and ability. Modern inventions seem to make enterprises collective in scope and nature. A man can compete against a hand forge. Can he compete against the Radio Corporation of America? Or against Google, Facebook? The main point is, does he have to compete? Is there or is there not room left for individualism in practice under the most extreme consequences of laissez-faire that can be imagined and legitimately supposed to happen? So we know this happens. We know that the big corporations can crush the competition. And she says, this is probably the point at which people now go in for collectivism and statism. But since the collectivism is not the solution, but only the complete surrender into the very evil one is opposing, is there a solution? Or is it that civilization must periodically collapse because it always becomes collectivism and stops? And that the moment any economic activity grows beyond the controllable capacity of one man, the limit has been reached and we go back into the Dark Ages again? So she says, all of these questions are probably nonsense, but an awfully clear statement and definition is needed. Okay. Now here is what I actually wanted to get to. So I can see 4 minutes have passed, so let's get to the meat. Excuse this digression, but if you're interested, you'll have enjoyed it or whatever. So here's where I wanted to get at. Are second-handers in the majority? That perhaps is the question, is the heart of the question. And it seems like she thinks so. But she says, well, maybe not. Maybe Pat is right. The fault is men's thinking, not in man's nature. Think on this point. So you see this Pat person obviously had a big influence on Ayn Rand in shifting from this more realistic view of man to a more idealistic view. Because again, if the fault is in man's thinking, what happens if with people who don't particularly have the capacity to think abstractly? What happens there? There's a problem there in the logic. So this position that Patterson is putting forth rests on an equalist/egalitarian worldview, which nowadays is being rejected en masse by people who are quote-unquote red-pilled. The election of Donald Trump, Brexit, whatever, all of it has sort of made people think about these issues more. Oh, well, maybe there really is differences between individuals. Maybe they're not all created equal. It was kind of a religion to believe so. Sort of religious dogma that we're all created equal. But direct experience tells us otherwise. And, there's another thing. That's, if you think that all men are created equal, you start to hate other people, which is not healthy. And you see the hate that comes out of the objectivist community if you have any experience with it. As soon as you think a wrong thought, you get ostracized and you get viciously attacked. But it's just a thought. Why are you getting so angry? Aristotle said it's the indication of a thinking mind, a great mind, philosopher. I don't remember exact words used. It's an indication of that if you can entertain an idea opposed to yours. And how can you entertain it? And this is, what the intellectuals with the highest men are supposed to do, entertain ideas. And they do it just for fun most of the time. So how can you do that if as soon as you entertain it, you're immediately attacked viciously? I mean, it's just an idea. We're just, entertaining an idea. We're just playing with ideas. That's how you think. So if you think that thinking is all that man's nature is, then you're going to hate other people just because they think differently. Although you probably thought something very different 5 years ago, 2 years ago, maybe 6 months ago, than you think now. So do you hate yourself back then? No, that would just be psychologically wrong. You shouldn't hate yourself because you thought a bad thought. I mean, that's absurd. And so a more realistic, non-equalist, non-egalitarian worldview opens up the possibility of, understanding and compassion, so to speak, for other people. I mean, there's plenty of people who are very unintellectual. They don't have the slightest interest in ideas that I do. And they're great. They're great. They're not particularly interested in talking about politics, philosophy, whatever. that doesn't make them bad people. It really doesn't. So I think the equalist egalitarian ideology or point of view is flawed. It's flawed. So without taking away, Ayn Rand's own, I don't want to say that Ayn Rand was duped into anything. I mean, she had the capacity to think for herself, but I think she was influenced by this person, because this Pat is very frequent in the journals. She talks about this Pat. Pat said this, Pat said that. So obviously this Pat had a significant influence, and if you're baffled by some of the egalitarianism you find in the objectivist community, or what we now call ObLeftivist community, because they are, if you're an egalitarian, you're of the left. In this community, you find a lot of this equalist egalitarian ideology. So Ayn Rand, between the transition of the novels, she had a little bit of that. So she wasn't an egalitarian, that's for sure. She wasn't. But let's say she planted the seed for it. So that's my difference with Lindsay, with Lindsay, and I've said this, ever since last year, or is it 2 years now? I don't remember. He would say that there's some kind of evil going on, and there's some kind of evil motives. Maybe they're paid by the Koch brothers or whatever, and that's making them ObLeftivists. And I would say, no, I think there's an intellectual, philosophic basis for their behavior. So I like the word ObLeftivist because, and some people have called me this, an ObRightivist. They try to counter meme, so to speak. It's not a very good meme. It doesn't sound very good. But I think there is something to that, because if there is in the corpus room to go both ways, so to speak, on this question, then you could say there's right objectivism and left objectivism. And unfortunately, I mean, I could be wrong, right? It's just a thought. I think that Ayn Rand has left the seed of equalism and egalitarianism, and the seed has grown into the Harry Binswangers of the world. I think that seed was planted, unfortunately, from the start of objectivism. So there was a seed of egalitarianism / equalism, and it grew, and we see the results now. However, as I'm getting into a little more, when I'm reading the journals and so forth, I think there's room to reevaluate this position, and I haven't seen anyone else do it, right? And hopefully by reiterating on this video, people will go back and think about it, and they can read and share my article on the leftist perversion of objectivism, which explains this. It explains this it's just like a 2-minute read. It's not very long. There's not much to say. I mean, it's essentially equalism and egalitarianism. The equalism of we're all created equal, and the egalitarianism of free, indiscriminatory immigration. So, there you have it. I kept it within 30 minutes, so it's the same length, more or less, of the Bruno and Lindsay show. And let me know if you like the video. So, if you don't let me know, I won't make these anymore. So, let me know if you liked it, and I'll make more, or else I'll just be, I'll stop doing it. So, ciao for now.